He's been involved with ACAP, which we're involved with as well. He's got a very interesting story to tell about media issues. And Tom, it's so good to see you again. Welcome to Manhattan Network.
It's always a pleasure, Harold.
Always good to. We met and the hustings of the franchise that was going on. But before we dive right into that, share a little of your own background. Okay, brief. We've done it before, but a little of your background and then your interest, and then we'll talk about media issues, particularly as it relates to the New York City area. But
my background. I was incarcerated for 8 years at a Catholic elementary school.
It's not incarceration.
Well,
That's
like
educational opportunity.
Okay.
I know. Yes, yeah.
I went to Jamaica High School.
Okay.
In its heyday, it was a great school. Great graduates from there: Bob Beeman, John Mitchell.
Jesuit?
No. New York City.
Oh, New York City.
High School.
Sorry.
Jamaica High School.
Okay. Yeah.
And graduated of Stony Brook University. Got a degree in political science, where I basically majored in discovering what I wanted to do in my life,
right.
more so than
right.
political science
right.
or philosophy.
Right.
And I spent a good time in my life up in Alaska for a few years.
I know you did. Yeah, it's an interesting place. Yeah.
And I came back here and I decided to get a law degree.
Okay. Yeah.
And
St. John's?
No, Toro.
Toro. Okay.
Which,
right.
At the time, it was located in Huntington. They're now out in Central Islip. And the rest is history. I have my own practice.
Yes.
I do mostly landlord-tenant and family law, and actually it's really a general practice. I do trademark, I do, and of course I do a lot of pro bono work involving media activism.
You have had an interest in that for a long time, decades long, it seems to me, and everything, because that's how we run into each other with Anna Vitale and so forth.
Right. I think that my first case was in '98.
Really? 10 years, huh?
Moss versus Cablevision. With regard to the speech rights of political candidates to be on a public access television show.
No kidding. Big issue, yeah.
Cablevision said you can't put candidates for public office on a public access television channel.
What's the reasoning for that?
Oh, they didn't, none that the judge ever bought.
Yeah, right.
But they would claim that equal time, which is just inapplicable in public access milieu.
Yeah,
public access is first come, first serve.
Well, it is. You know, I know that's the thing you've been really interested in. It's interesting. There was I sent you some material. I don't know if you had a chance to see it, but
Briefly.
have you become aware of this fellow Sidney Dean or not? Have you come aware? The beginnings of public access. It goes back to about 1970.
Right.
And Sidney Dean was a fellow from the Civil Society, City Club, but he was also head of media for the largest advertising agency, and he was in touch with the town fathers as the cable companies were coming, and so the whole process of franchising was sort of being worked out, and Sidney Dean was a very interesting, good guy, and he was in touch with George Stoney and others, but he was saying public access channels, and the idea of public access channels was new, and he used to say, one of the dictums he's talking about they can talk whole cloth when you're just forming something. He said the capacity should always exceed the number of people who want to use it in order to make the thing right. And if that cannot be the case, then it should be first come, first serve. And I'm not sure where all those things came down and whether or not the capacity issue is one that we may have exceeded here at Manhattan Network, but if that's the case across the country, but he had that view. Does that still hold, or what is the view or the accepted notion of, particularly on this issue? I know you've been interested, first come, first serve.
Well, you know, this public access, the demand for public access channel capacity has really gone up in the last 10 years. It's probably in a direct correlation, a direct function of the price of video hardware coming down in price.
Yeah.
The number of people making video and producing video and wanting to air on a cable channel is going up.
Yeah.
Now there's YouTube, and so people don't even have to resort to public access. People go straight to YouTube these days. There's a lot of people making video out there, and it's great. It's kind of the issue seems now more to be how to find what's interesting to you, how to find the content that appeals to you.
Yeah, because there's going to be so much of it.
There's tons of it. The amount of video that goes up on YouTube every day is staggering.
It is staggering. It's only going to grow, and I think it's morphing over to the cell phone universe.
Right. And
you know?
Right, exactly.
And you're going to be able to originate programming from a cell phone.
That's right. Oh,
streaming. You're going to have we're going to end up with 6 billion television channels, in a certain sense, in the telecosm.
Well, you know,
it's going to be a little problem trying to sort all that out. Lily Tomlin with her thing, remember she used to be connecting the telephone calls with the Emory board? She's going to have a hard time connecting all that up. But
that's right.
Things are moving fast. Yeah.
That's right. Well, you know, with regard to first come, first served, you know, it brought something that's sort of lacking from public access nowadays. If you look at public access the way it's done in New York City these days, well, I'll give you a good example. It's out in Queens. They've declared a tie for everybody. It's a tie, and they just draw lots for who gets the channel capacity.
I don't know what you mean.
No, first come, first. Well, normally priority in time is the concept of first come, first served. Okay. The guy who comes after you, he gets on after you, and you give him the channel capacity, and he's next. And there's a line, and then you just queue up for your turn. And if it's not for next on the channel, it's next to select your slot or to select where you want your programming to run. Nowadays,
in terms of scheduling,
in terms of scheduling,
the programming, right.
So they've declared a tie in Queens County, and everyone just gets the luck of the draw. You get the channel capacity you possibly can, and in fact, last year, more people applied than they had channel capacity for, and which was ridiculous because they made a scarcity of their own channel capacity because they gave everybody 2 slots. So that's why a lot of people didn't get on. And it's a shame now because there's people who want to go on the public access channel in Queens. They have to wait a year.
You're talking about Queens now. We're in Manhattan now.
Right.
And there's 3,000 of these across the country.
Yes, right.
And so that's the thing we want to keep in mind, that larger context and everything like that. And it's too bad because, as I understand, unlike here in Manhattan, when you put on a program here in Manhattan, it's streamed to the Internet.
Right.
At the same time, dependably and high quality. It looks like television on a computer anywhere in the world. So that a lot of people who are thinking, no matter what the time is, somewhere on this earth is prime time, whatever time your program goes on. And when you make that kind of a transition, that's like opening up increased abundant capacity for different aspects of communication that the technology, if it's not there at access centers around the country, it will be soon because the technology is moving so quickly out of the cyber realm, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely.
And the capability is growing. So the capability to provide an abundant capacity is growing all the time, and that's the curve that we'd want to keep ahead of.
Right.
Or in touch with, or let that be ahead of where we actually are, but we have bottlenecks that happen.
But there's people, can't tell you what the present situation. I've just looked at the roster of programming on MNN.
Yeah.
And it looks very crowded. There's no fallow time. That's the time that, there's no programming on. You're utilizing all of your capacity.
Yeah, but we're going to be able to have increased channels.
Well,
they're going to be able to have increased channels technologically.
The Verizon franchise agreement, which is up for
at this very days that we're talking.
There was a public hearing 2 days ago.
We met there yesterday, or 2 days ago.
And the Franchise Concession and Review Committee, Franchise and Concession Review Committee is going to vote on it on Tuesday.
That would have voted on it when this program airs Thursday. We'll have voted on it 2 days ago.
It'll be already voted on.
Yeah, right.
And they are proposing to put more channels up. Unfortunately, it's actually a rollback in what the city was entitled to under the incumbent franchise agreements. The Time Warner and Cablevision promised to give the city peg channels that were pro rata compared to the numbers they gave, which was, I think, 9 channels out of 80.
Yeah.
And they proposed to give the city peg channels that percentage, that pro rata quantity of bandwidth, which would be a bunch of channels, more than they're now giving you for public access under this Verizon proposed agreement. So they're actually, the dirty little secret is that when they expand it, there was actually a give back. There's actually less than there was
from what they originally were talking about. Is that what you mean?
What they should have had,
or
under
what
the other contract. If the city enforced its rights under the old contract and said, give us our pro rata share of bandwidth.
Spell that out. What is that? I don't quite understand.
9 out of 80. I believe they were back when they drafted that agreement in 1997 or 98.
Yeah, about 10 years ago.
There were 80 channels, and 9 of them were PEG channels. So that's a little over 10%.
Spell out for the audience PEG.
Public, educational, and governmental access channels.
Yeah.
Ironically, in the city here, they don't even designate educational access channels. That's going back to Mayor Giuliani and his hatred for the New York City Board of Education. He was give us all to the government. We don't trust those educational people to manage a television channel.
That's really indicative of how a local power structure can fiddle with the rules by which these things happen. And that's the question we want to address in this program.
Well, it still carries over to this day. Under the new franchise that they're negotiating, they haven't designated any educational channel capacity.
Well, they're still called PEG. They still use that acronym.
That's right. But they only but Verizon only dedicates public and governmental access. There's no educational. The city feels, well, we'll give some to CUNY, and that'll be the educational access.
Okay, we're using acronyms and terms and everything that the general audience probably doesn't understand.
CUNY?
But yeah, CUNY, they do. I understand that. Yeah, but they do. And what we're talking about is, in the case of the cable television coming along, it got started about 1970 in an institutional way, and they set aside channel capacity and also money from the earnings of the cable companies to go to entities in the realm of public, which we are in. This is public access, so that's open, and the charge is to serve the people, which is a very large and sweeping charge, but they have that. And then educational facilities and government, and that's some payback from the cable companies who were going to use the streets and the byways and so forth, and also recognize that, as Lord Beaverbrook said from England about media entities, that it is a license to print money. They were going to make a great deal of money, and so there was payback to the public through the government involvement and some civil servants, some people from the civil society having influence. The educational we understand, and the government we understand in terms of a normal private sector, public sector, or government sector, private sector arrangement of society. But the public, where money comes to set up this facility, millions of dollars to set it up, both capital costs and operating costs, was for the city. That was new in terms of the history of communications. And has that ever been, is that vouchsafed in terms of accepted law
let's be clear.
Across the country, that relationship that the cable companies or the people have to provide for the people of a given area money from their earnings to let this public access exist? Where does all that stand in your mind? How fragile is it, and what's the outlook ahead?
The Cable Act of 1984 established that local municipalities, which are the franchising authorities, may ask from a franchisee, that's the cable operator who wants to lay their cables in the streets, they may demand in a franchise agreement 5% of the gross revenues as a franchise fee, and they may also require the cable operators to provide money and facilities for public, educational, and governmental access
in addition
channels.
To the 5%?
In addition to the 5%.
In addition to the 5%.
And don't kid yourself, it's not really coming out of their money. They can pass that along to the cable subscriber.
Well, they charge
and they
more.
put it on the bill
they can do that.
How much of the franchise fee that you're paying that's going to the PEG access channels.
Yeah, that's going to the PEG access channels that make available equipment and the capacity for the citizens to go and produce a program. The capital costs are met out of that, and the operating costs, staff and so forth, so that the producer who wants to do multimedia in this realm is able to do it to the producer at zero cost.
Yes, that's right.
And they're required, and that's accepted across the land in terms of what is called, you're an attorney. I'm not. I'm the son of an attorney. So I'm a son of an attorny. But they don't, I don't
Sounds
know.
like a curse.
But yeah, it does, doesn't it? But it was like,
Son of an
first
attorney.
we kill all the lawyers, right? But there's a term loosely used that seems to be accepted law. And there's 3,000 of these across the country. And it seems to me, if I may, Tom, it seems to me I thought about it very hard, a lot lately, because they've made me interim president of this ACAP thing, and I'm thinking about it. It seems to me it's the only instance in the history of communications where that holds. It didn't hold for CBS local television had no obligation to provide the ability for the public to participate. Telephone did not. They did not. They had to supply the product. Carrier pigeon services, or Pony Express, or whatever you go, and they did. Only public access cable television is there a provision to provide the ability for the public to participate in the making and distribution of multimedia communication, which I think makes it very, very unique. And I'm very pleased that it seems to be accepted law across the land, and the people relate to that as something that is an obligation that they pay attention to and don't just ignore. It is coming out of their earnings. They can pass it on to their subscriber base and so forth, or something like that. But it is taking from their could be retained earnings to invest in some thing they want to do. But whatever money there is, they follow and they accept that. Yes. And that's something that, is it safe? Is it safe harbored? Is there somebody going to come along and say, we don't want to do that? Nobody else has to do it. Automobiles don't have to do it. Steel industry, nobody else has to have that kind of an obligation to the people. Only public access cable television.
Well, it's the right-of-way issue.
Well, okay.
Now the broadcast television.
But it's accepted law.
It's not about acceptance. It's about the statutes that say that the local municipalities may require it. And don't kid yourself.
Okay.
There are municipalities that do not require it.
Okay.
There are places in this country where they're, notwithstanding that there's cable systems throughout the municipality, there is no public educational or governmental access channels.
And they just don't bother.
Generally, you'll find it in the more conservative communities where the prevailing wisdom is, oh, you mean the cable operator can pass the cost of that along to the subscriber in 5% franchise,
increase in the bill.
And in fact, some municipalities try to keep the 5% number down. They don't take the maximum amount. And here in New York, we've always required every cable franchisee to pay the full 5% as a franchise fee to the city for using its streets, etc., for the right-of-ways.
Well, okay, go ahead and spell it out. I'm trying. I got questions.
But in places out west, there's some communities that say, we're only going to ask for a 1.5% franchise fee, and because it gets passed along, those franchise fees get passed along to the cable subscribers, and the folks say, well, that's a tax, and the anti-tax folks are very averse to it. And they don't support it. They don't support high franchise percentages. They don't support requiring the cable operator to fund public educational and governmental access channels because it's just going to be passed along to the cable subscriber who eventually pays for it.
Well, that's the point I, in a sense, was trying to make because, again, in the history of communication, from cave wall paintings to the modern experience, there's only one instance where that has become, in a certain sense, a pattern where it applies, that the cable companies who are in a private sector, profit-making context, vis-a-vis the government, I mean, that's involved. They call it public sector, private sector. That's the way all the news is set. That's the way all the thinking about the society is set. Private sector can make money. Public sector can tax and spend and regulate. And those forces are the loci of power and influence in the society. But there was an element of civil society, something newly emerging that was relevant in 1970 when the template got set. And that is for the people. And the charge is not, because a certain percentage of their retained earnings net of taxes from the government process, which is the way all the economy works, is set aside for the public.
Well,
and it's coming out of that. So it's not tax and spend. It's coming out of a system of financing communications that is so totally unique, is what I'm saying, in terms of the history of communication.
Well, the financing.
And it should be understood. And can they just, could the system or the cable companies just say, we don't want to have anything to do with that. We're just going to, you know, how does accepted law become accepted in a way that it's not just overturned within the decision of some particular company says, we'd rather keep all that money for ourselves and invest it in something else other than the so-called people like Manhattan Network?
Harold, the key is that the municipality may require it. If the municipality doesn't require it, then there isn't any. Okay? So that's the key, is the municipality may require it. Here in New York, it's almost a foregone conclusion that the municipality is going to require it.
Isn't it the case in most cities, most places? Why would they not take advantage of that?
There was no public access in Philadelphia until about 3 years ago.
Really? Okay. So it's
now what is that, from 1960s till 3 years ago? There was no public access in Philadelphia. Pennsylvania is a particular state where there's a lot of areas where they don't have public access.
All right. Okay. Right. We got 3,000 entities around the country. That's considerable. What I'm trying to say, it's a
How many municipalities do we have, Howard?
We have millions. Ask Carl Pearson. He'll tell you there's all kinds. I understand. It's a small sliver. It's a small sliver. But it's unique in the sense that it comes from this public civil society.
But Harold, that's driven by the technology. What cable is. Cable is this, you know, there was only so much spectrum when broadcast television came out. There was only so much spectrum, only so many people could occupy it, and there became recognized that, well, with license to use the airwaves became a public obligation, and they required all the broadcasters to fulfill their duty to their communities, and every several years when their license is up to be renegotiated.
They're always renewed.
They're always renewed, it's true. But they ask for comments, public comments to the FCC to say, you know, so people in the public can comment and say, well, they haven't done a good job. But they're always renewed.
But the point in the thing, in all of that, in that dialectic, that was between the federal or the state or the local. It was government. It was public sector, private sector. That was the locus of power. And this public, what they're doing is not that. It's the people. This is for the people it's done, and it's unique in the history of communications, and it seems to have a little sliver of influence, this public access thing. It's exerted, and it seems to me that should be recognized as something that is valuable. I think it is. We're growing now, and that's the thing that I'm calling, that it's a unique aspect of communication in terms of the way in which the society is going to be communicating, and communication is the DNA in terms of the broader social, political, and economic organizing principles by which a society organizes. So it's a very important thing that concerned citizens could be aware of and in support of, I would think.
What cable did from a technological perspective is it permitted the birth of narrowcasting. We talk about broadcasting, and there was limited spectrum, and the programming, which there was only so much of, was driven by advertising models, and people had to put programming on that had very broad appeal to the public. Now, with cable, with the potential for enormous amount of bandwidth, and now we have...
Not to mention open source.
Now we have on-demand, video on-demand programming. You can... It's really unlimited what you can almost have out there. And so very narrow interests can be served by video programming on cable television that could never have been served in the broadcast era. So that's one of the things that's most interesting about public access, is you and I are sitting here right now, and we're talking about public access. There's a lot of people who don't care.
I know that. A lot of people don't. They're all watching NBC or something.
But
all the Nielsen will show us that.
Well, they might be watching another public access program other than this one. Because they don't care about the subject matter that you and I are talking about right now.
Well, or there's a lot of subject area. If you start talking about the people, we were just joking in a way. You're going to get streaming from a cell phone. You're going to end up with 6 billion. You got 6 billion people. Everybody's going to have a channel. That's a lot of diversity. It's called democracy. And in the minds of a lot of people, what they're really looking for is somebody who is a star, a Tiger Woods in whatever field they're in, so that they can get the eyeballs attracted to get the advertising and so forth. So that's a model that plays in the industry. But in the cable, we got like 3,000 producers here coming out of here. You're making it available not only to the stars, like in the industry, but to the people, which is sort of unique in a way. And they did have at the beginning, in 1970s, about when you could date it institutionally, they had that Sloan, do you remember that or not? I'm not sure. Maybe you weren't involved with the media. The Sloan Commission, it was all
sure.
people. Yeah, and they said cable television, and it was subtitled, a major study that took reference to all of these issues at the birthing of this new age with coaxial cable and so on. They said cable television, the medium of abundance.
Right.
Abundance, not scarcity. Abundance. There's a lot.
That's why you can narrowcast.
Yeah, that's right. And you can you can maybe extend it to the people rather than the commercial interests who monopolize all other aspects of the economy, it would seem to me, except as consumers or people, employees within corporations that are run and benefit a small group of people within our society in terms of the economy.
Right. Well, you know, broadcast television is driven by the listeners and the viewers and what they want to see. I mean, you look at the American Idol phenomena, people want to see that schlock.
You know what I think they should have, if I may? They ought to have ideas. Like you got the American Idol, somebody can sing or shake a booty or whatever they do. I've never seen it, but I've heard. Why couldn't they have people with really outstanding ideas be in competition, and they find that are really relevant to solving the major problems that confront the human condition to avoid species lethal destruction of our species with weapon systems that also have the ability to provide a new and liberating context. People that have...
Isn't that your television show? Isn't
that
this program?
No, it might not be. It might be the kid down the block or something.
But well, I think if you take all your programs that you've done, and don't you have the longest running public access show in America?
I think that is the case as it happens, yeah.
So if you took all the guests you've had over the years and you put everything that they said together, maybe in there somewhere is some of the solutions to some of the problems we face in this world.
Or if you take the cable public access programming, and the thing is not just that, no, but that's one aspect, but you take it as a democratizing thing, because you got opportunity for people to communicate, not in some context like that. It might be just a band of kazoo players or people, you know, that is democratized. It's the people.
Right.
And that's something important. And there's a unique way to finance it.
Right.
And it comes from the cable industries. I can remember when I was about 74 going down, and they had the Telstar come, and they had the ability to set out a network of television in the cable world. And Gerald Levin was in the head of home box office. He became the chairman and CEO of Time Warner and everything, but he was at home box office. And they used to have to they had these 2-inch high beam tapes. They were like 35 millimeter. And they had to send those suckers, 2 or 3 for 1 hour film, to the head end of all the the cable outlets around the country, and they'd just been able to link them by satellite. Right. And they were happy as a kid with toy, and that they had that capability that was there. But then there was also about that time, and I did a program in Washington, if I may. I want to get, you know, but. And I was talking to the fellow who did a program, and then afterward I said, I think we ought to have a channel that will present the world intellectual leadership, you know, like as its programming content, so which the people could repair to get a sense of reality. And he said, well, that's an interesting idea. He said, what I'm thinking, we're having a cup of coffee, warming our hands, and he had an envelope, and he said, well, I'm thinking of bringing a channel to the people that could bring the House of Representatives. And what do you think, Harold? He said, I'm thinking of calling. He said, he put on an envelope. He says, yeah, it's going to be delivered by cable, so it's going to be C, and it's going to be delivered by satellite. That's going to be an S, and it's going to be public affairs. It's going to be an S. With C-SPAN with Brian Lamb. And Brian Lamb has brought a capability that really serves well the cable industry as PR. It's probably the jewel in their crown in terms of addressing questions from a serious way and so forth. But that could be expanded equally, perhaps beneficially, public relations-wise, to the cable industry and so forth, if they, instead of just giving it short shrift, really give support to this idea of democratizing that, reaching it out to the people, and making many, many voices available in the telecosm. What do you think?
Well, Harold, certainly the public access is where these types of programs are going to happen, because it's unfortunate, but more Americans would rather vote for American Idol than President of the United States.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
That's not probably true. That's definitely true. In 2004, more people were voting for their favorite idol than voted for President of the United States.
Is that really true?
That's really
never seen. Have you ever seen the program? I've never seen it. I've heard of it.
I try to avert my eyes.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But
the point is, so it's going to happen on public access. One of the shame I got to say, and I don't really pat Rudy Giuliani on the back so much.
Yeah. Right.
But I tell you that the crosswalk if you look at the governmental access channel in New York.
Okay.
It used to have a bunch of very dry programming on it. But it was dry because what it was trying to do was showing you the workings of government. And the working of government is sometimes very dry.
It shouldn't even be observed like making sausage.
But now you look at the channel, and they've got fashion programs on. They got a program $9.99 where you can go for spend a day in the city for $10.
Yeah.
And they're of interest, but they're closing and narrowing the window into government that channel used to provide. I used to sit and watch the loft board. The loft board.
Well, you do tenants, yeah.
Well, right.
Yeah.
But I used to be able to sit in Queens and watch the loft board pass on my tenant's application, or et cetera, et cetera. And very few people would be interested in it, but it provided an enormous service to me, who could sit in Queens and watch the loft board take action on their agenda.
Yeah, right.
The city council, but the actual, it's a shame that's what Congress had in mind when they said, let's have some governmental access channels. They said, let's have the municipalities show government at work. Now they're like government boosterism channels. Rah, rah, New York's the greatest. Oh, we're really great.
PR,
but they really don't show the mechanism, government at work, the council sessions. I mean, there's some council sessions, but they could do so much more. It was a better channel when Rudy Giuliani called it crosswalks. Now they count the Emmys that they win, and you can't watch the Taxi and Limousine Commission, the Loft Board. The New York Times thinks this is progress. I think that this is the decline of governmental access television.
Okay. Yeah, and that's a shame, and it's particularly if, back to the Sloan Commission, access of communication, of abundance. We have an abundant capacity, and there's a bunch of different, we have great capacity. All of our economic models are giving great value to scarcity. If you have keep it scarce, keep it there so that you can get more and more out of that. But there is an abundant capacity that's coming out of the computer labs and the research and so forth. It's coming in spades now, and it's heading toward, through the linking up with the internet. But none of that is got a provision for, let's say, payment for setting up a facility for the people, other than public, or you call it PEG, but the government and the government and the educational institutions fit into the traditional pattern. But you got something so wide as for the public. So anybody that's in Manhattan can come here and set up a program if they want to. And it's all free, and they can have access to a stream and all that. It's done, and it's very unique, and it should be understood as such by the citizens and given great support, it would seem to me, as a movement. And this happens in Portland, Oregon, or could happen. And the means by which that process happens, how those places are managed, what is done, is something that the people have access to, and that's something that's a little sliver of opportunity in terms of communication by the people about what's going on, and they could encourage the things like you're talking about, of fully utilizing the capability to bring a wide variety of programming, including government hearings and things like that are interesting to a small audience, because we've got the capability of doing that. Let's do it. It would benefit the society.
Well, public access, broadcast television focuses on what does the viewer want. Public access focuses on what does the speaker want to say. And everyone can come on here and be a speaker, and I'm telling you, a lot of it's not a rating blockbuster.
Yeah, right.
Okay, because no one might care what some people have to say.
Absolutely, they take exception to it.
But that's right. But
you might, okay.
But still, the idea is to let these people have a chance, to let these people be heard. Hey, I wonder sometimes.
It's called democracy.
It's not only is it democracy. sometimes you got to let people let off steam.
Yes, absolutely.
Or you have violent revolution.
Absolutely, yeah. You're doing a lot of tenant work now in the age of subprime and all that, and there's a lot of problems, foreclosures, all kinds of injustices coming down, inoperative aspects of the society and the system, and you would be aware of that, particularly as an attorney. Yeah.
Right. Well, I think getting into we could have another show about landlord-tenant law in New York, which is really one of the main things that I do is represent apartment building tenants in New York City.
Good for you. And, they sure need it.
They sure need it. Yeah. And what else they need is they need a legislature that won't back down on rent control and rent stabilization, because it's really been a shame what's passed up in Albany. But I'm digressing. Let's get back to public access.
Yes, by all means,
Hey, let's talk. Can we talk about the Verizon contract?
Absolutely do. It was just announced they had 18 months in negotiation. They gave about, go ahead, talk about it. Spell it out what it is. Because we've had traditionally in New York, we've had Time Warner, RCN, I guess Cablevision have been in the cable business here in New York, and now Verizon's going to enter apparently.
Yeah, give me a minute here.
Yeah, please.
Mayor Bloomberg, who is a billionaire with cable channels in the cable business, when he became mayor, the Conflict of Interest Board said, well, to be mayor, you want to be mayor if you don't divest yourself of your billions of dollars worth of television, which he would have taken a beating on financially if he divested himself. You're going to have to stay out of the negotiations of cable franchise agreements. And the mayor agreed to do that. And allegedly, he's had no hand in the negotiation of any of these new cable franchise agreements, if you believe that. The mayor has, they spent 18 months, even though the mayor's had no hand in it, he spent 18 months in negotiation with Verizon. And then on April 8th, I think it was, last month, they put out a request for proposals for people to supply an overbuild system to go in competition
for the whole of New York,
Time Warner and Cablevision for all of New York.
Yeah, big project.
And then 3 weeks later, lo and behold, they announced that they have a deal with Verizon, acting as if then Verizon came along 3 weeks later after this RFP, the request for proposals, and as if they weren't in 18 months negotiation.
They'd been negotiating.
And then 3 weeks later, they want the Franchise and Concession Review Committee to go up or down on this agreement.
That's where we were 2 days ago.
And nobody's really had a chance to review this agreement. And they're just trying to ram it down people's throats. Is it good that Verizon should want to come into New York and compete with Time Warner and cable?
So.
It is fantastic that they want to do so.
What are the details?
Shouldn't the public get the best deal possible as opposed to whatever's been worked out between the city, which is not always really representative of the people? Sometimes I feel that this contract was negotiated between Corporation Council and Do It and city government.
Do It, spell out Do
and
It.
Do
spell
It.
out Do It.
Department of Information Technology and Telecommunications.
Part of the mayor's office.
No, well, they're their own agency.
Oh, they are their agency, but it's under the mayor, no?
Well, it's part of the city government.
Yeah, part of the city government, right.
And it seems like, and you know, governments sometimes have institutional interests.
Well, of course.
And I think that it's the institutional interests that are being served as opposed to the people. You know, the last 19 words of the Gettysburg Address.
What are they? I don't know.
That government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from this earth. That's why those brave men died in Gettysburg, fighting for that.
For the people.
For the people. Wow. Not just government of the people and by the people, but for the people. And so I kind of wonder when I see these franchise agreements and they have a provision in them, because it's supposed to be for the best interests of everyone in the city of New York, and it's got a provision in it that says there shall be no third-party beneficiaries of this agreement. That is that the people for who this agreement benefits shall not have any rights to enforce it if any of the parties breach it, the city or Verizon. And actually, there's a history of the city standing by and watching cable operators breach their agreements and the city doing nothing. Because, well, I don't
Well, the Verizon people will say if there's competition, they won't be able to get away with that because the market will bring competition, and then, you know, that's what they'll say, of course.
They'll all go. When these big corporations want to breach these agreements, they breach these agreements. when you call them on it, they'll try to say, oh, we weren't breaching the agreement, until you get maybe the Public Service Commission backed into a corner and say, well, yes, I guess, he's got a point. Maybe you were breaching the agreement. And then they usually give these big corporations waivers so they can continue to breach the agreement.
Well, we've had a great concentration of power in the hands of the corporations, that sort of thing, and all of that. We have that. And then in the case of other things, like, say, telephone, or let's say gas, water, there are things where things that were so ubiquitously important, also so intrinsic to the economy and everything like that, that they developed a class of our organization called utilities. Or in communication, they had a thing called common carrier for telephone, that kind of thing, because there were certain things. Where does that fit? Where does cable fit in terms of those provisions? Because in many cases, the cable company had a monopoly over cable services in any particular market.
Let me tell you where it fits.
Okay.
It fits wherever we want it to fit.
Okay.
We've decided.
We? Who's the we?
Government mostly.
Government. Okay, that's government entities.
Has decided that they're going to let the private sector have their way with our communications utilities, because that's what cable is. That's what Verizon, whether you call it. The only reason they have to ask for a cable franchise is because they want to provide video programming, not just digital telephone and broadband.
Right.
They want to provide video programming.
Well, that's the way the world's going. Yeah,
and once you provide video programming under the Federal Cable Act, you're a cable. You have to get a franchise.
Okay, you have to get a franchise from the local authority. Right.
Even though Verizon's already had their rights to lay they've had their rights to lay cables in the streets all along for the provision of telephone service for decades.
Yeah, twisted pair.
Right, exactly.
But you got the last mile with, they're going to do fiber optic, Philos or something. Is fiber optic state of the art? That's a very costly thing, I would think.
They didn't need this franchise agreement to lay fiber optic
cable. Okay, why is it going on? Why is this process
going on? Because they want
to
maximize the dollars they can squeeze out of that fiber optic
cable.
Well,
doesn't every business enterprise have an obligation to their whoever their responsible shareholders and so forth to maximize their profit? That's what they're in business for.
That's absolutely right. You know, and you're going to make me digress here. Because
I don't want. Well, go ahead.
Earlier today, I was at the Cablevision shareholders meeting.
Okay.
I'm a Cablevision shareholder, and I annually go down to that meeting. And Cablevision just bought Newsday.
They did. I didn't realize. I thought Murdoch was after it.
Murdoch was after it.
He backed out.
In fact, look for me in Wednesday's Newsday, because the Newsday reporter interviewed me after the shareholders meeting. We were talking about Newsday and how. We're kind of happy that Dolan has bought it, because it's sort of like voting for Obama or McCain. You're not choosing who you want to be president. You're choosing the lesser of two evils. And if I got to choose between Charles Dolan managing Newsday or Rupert Murdoch getting another newspaper in the New York market,
hard choice, right?
I'm going to take
Charles Dolan. I don't think Charles
Dolan.
I did programs with Charles Dolan way back when. I don't think he's too favorably inclined toward public access.
Historically, he's not. He's toned it down a bit. I think he's come to realize that it's the price of doing business in New York.
Well, that's what I meant about accepted law. That's what I think.
Accepted law.
Well, you see, I'm using legal. I'm trying to get something. Can the system at any time just this little sliver, this little something that appeared where there's responsibility for the system, with all the power and so forth, to give something and set up a thing that is based for the people.
Right.
Provision for them to communicate on somewhat like an even playing field with the big players, governmental or private. There's this little tiny opening, and it seems to me not enough people realize how important that might be as a wedge for the communication. That's what I'm saying. And can they just take that away with the stroke of a pen, or with somebody in a smoke-filled room says, let's quit that? And or is it public relations, because it's an advantageous to take? We could also sell them on that. How secure is the provisions within the systems across the country? I did a program with our Director of External Affairs here, and it used to be in the United States of America women couldn't vote. There's a lot of people who think that was something that got established. They were going to let them vote. They couldn't vote in Switzerland until 1976, women. Crazy. But people would say, everything's gone to hell since the women started voting. Let's take the vote away from the women. Let's take it away. It's part, but it becomes acceptable, or some people would want to go back to chattel slavery. That's a convenient way to organize society. But we've changed, you know, things change and evolve. And what is it that keeps something in place? I call it accepted law, that they're accepting this as part of the context.
Who's accepting it?
The system. The system. Yeah, there's 3,000 places of public access across the country. Those cable operators and the people there and the local governments, they recognize this obligation for those cable entities to pay money to set up public access, particularly public access.
Verizon's not accepting it. They're down in their telecom lobbyists in the United States.
They shut us down in 2 minutes.
Okay. Well, okay.
So the telecom lobby in the United States has been very strong, and they're asking for that to be for it to be thrown out. They're asking. They'd like to see state franchising. They'd probably like to see the PEG provisions go away. And how secure is it? It's as secure. If you saw the Verizon people down there at the Franchise and Concession Review Committee meeting, you recognize that they have a world-class lobbying organization.
Yeah, sure.
And so it's not that secure right now. It's written in the statute books. It's federal law. But you know, it's just not that secure as long as there's people out there who want to change it and get rid of it.
Well, there would be people who would want to get rid of that obligation that imposes on them, that encumbers their retained earnings after taxes.
Do you remember back in the day, you know, we used to have this free water in New York. We pay for our water now. We used to get free water. They built this aqueduct system. Everybody got water. You turned on the tap, and that was the water. And we should really have broadband that way in this city, because it really is. It surely costs money, but really, why are all of us going to have to pay a bunch of money to private operators to have a communication facility, which really is almost essential in the 21st, certainly by the 22nd century? Communications facilities like this are going to be as vital as water.
Oh, absolutely. It's the DNA of communication, and it also might apply to other aspects of the economy. The idea might be extended out to other aspects over the means of production, ultimately, so that you get some public input to this. One of the problems is we run out of time, Tom. We've run out of time for the program. Just touched the surface of it. Very important. Sorry we missed this, so where we could the process ended 2 days ago when this program will air, and so forth. But it's a big issue, and public access is a big issue. It's something that we're wanting to follow up on.